So like last month, I've decided to split my wrap-up into 2 parts. Unlike last month though, I'm not waiting to the end of the month to do 2 wrap-ups. I'm going to do this one halfway through. So at the end of June, I said that I read the first in his Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman, which is Northern Lights or The Golden Compass, depending on whether you're in the UK or the US. I continued with my reread of the trilogy, and so I read The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass, both of which were as amazing as I remember and also went beyond what I remember. I read these when I was quite young, and then I reread them and reread them so many times, so they're very familiar to me, but on rereading them, I understood a lot more of the political side of things, of the religious side of things particularly, and I had a much better understanding of the context in which these books belong. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think these books are absolute masterpieces. I've never read anything else like it, and they remain among my very favourite books. So not quite wanting to leave that world behind again, I read Once Upon a Time in the North, which is also by Philip Pullman, and this is a prequel to his Dark Materials trilogy. The main characters in this are Lee Scoresby and Yorick Bernison, and if you've read his Dark Materials then you'll be very familiar with those 2 characters. The great thing about his Dark Materials is that it is so amazing as a whole, and you really have to see the bigger picture, whereas this is outside of that, so it didn't have the same impact because of that, but I really enjoyed just reading about some of these beloved characters and getting to see them again in a fresh light. So I would recommend reading this if you've read his Dark Materials. Next is The Fair Fight by Anna Freeman. Now this is a book that had been on my radar for a wee while. I'd seen it in the bookshop. It's been published for quite some time now. The reason that I remember it is that there is a Sarah Waters quote on the front, and that made me think, oh, maybe I should pick this up. But the subject matter didn't really interest me all that much because it's about female boxing. I say that it's about female boxing, but it's not really about female boxing. At its core, this novel is really about women and their role in society in the Victorian times, and basically how they try to get out of their situations. So it's very similar to Sarah Waters in style, in time period, and in its feminist themes. It does also have some LGBT themes, although not in the way that I was expecting. I will leave you to discover that yourselves. If you want to go and pick this one up, I won't spoil it for you. Then I finally got round to reading Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. This is about a hermaphrodite who is raised as a girl but knows that something isn't quite right. Because of this, it sort of goes into the nature versus nurture argument quite a bit and really explores that in this fictional world. There's also quite a bit of Greek history, which I wasn't particularly familiar with, so that was really interesting. This is a very well researched book as well. The next book was a bit of a lighter read, but the title suggests otherwise. It's called A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This was really just entertaining and fast-paced and enjoyable. The premise of this book is that there are 4 Londons, so it's the multiple worlds idea, and you've got Red London, which is where our main protagonist lives. He can walk between the worlds. Then there's Grey London, where Leela lives, and she is the main female character. Then we've got White London, which seems a bit more totalitarian. Finally, there is Black London, and Black London has been lost, and we don't know what has happened to it or if it's possible to get there. It's quite a simple narrative, but I think it's set up well for a sequel, so I will definitely be picking that up when it comes out. I'm also looking forward to more character development, because while there is character development in this one, I feel like there could be a lot more, and that felt like the direction that the book was going in. Yeah, so I definitely recommend this as a fun read. And then I read a book called Adulting: How to Become a Grown-Up in 468 Steps, and this is by Kelly Williams Brown. This is basically what it says on the box. I listened to this as an audiobook and I didn't really think that it worked so well on audio. It's one of those books that you kind of want to have on your shelf to refer to every now and again. It's sort of, yeah, one of those how-to books, and there are lots of lists in there, and I felt like I needed to be scribbling notes, and that's quite difficult to do if you're listening to an audiobook and walking to the supermarket, for instance. Yes, I would certainly recommend you get the physical copy of this book. Aside from that, I mean, some of the advice was quite obvious, I thought. Other things were really useful. The career and networking advice was particularly interesting. The main thing that I took away from this book was the idea of sending thank you notes for everything, basically. She has some great advice on how to structure said thank you note, and also when to use a written note and when to use an email. This is something that I try to do anyway, but it really hammered that point home. Then we have another fantasy novel. This is a bit out of character for me. This one was Sabriel by Garth Nix. The reason I picked this one up is that lots of people had said that it's kind of similar to his Dark Materials. So I mean, I was setting myself up for failure with that, because I knew that it wasn't going to be as good, because I don't think anything can live up to his Dark Materials for me. But this was an enjoyable read, and I've heard that the second and third books are better than the first. So I will be continuing with the series at some point. Then I read Three Souls by Janie Chang. This is a story about a woman who has just died, and she meets her three souls. The souls are a wee bit like the ghosts from A Christmas Carol. They show her her past, and they kind of sit around commenting about it. The idea of all this is that she can fix some mistakes that she has made in her past, and in doing so she will be able to go on to the next life and be reincarnated. I really enjoyed this. It was set in the 1920s and 1930s, so there's a lot of political intrigue. At that time there was a lot of paranoia about communism, a lot of worry that people would think that you were a communist as well. I won't say any more about the plot because it's a fun one to discover for yourself, but I will say that I found it fascinating, and it's one that I can highly recommend. The next book is a classic, and it is Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. This is quite a different sort of book. It is a novel, but it's written in verse. I did a little bit of research about this, and I found out that the rhyming scheme is unique to this book. It is known as the Onegin stanza or the Pushkin sonnet. It took a little while to tune into the structure, but once I got into it, I really enjoyed it. The narrator of this story is kind of hilarious at times. Apparently the narrator was modelled on Pushkin himself, and this story did kind of need some humour in it because it really is a tragic love story. The title character is a bit of a twat and doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just kind of bored and overly self-important. He's really the destructive force at the centre of this novel. The main female character, who is the love interest, is quite impressionable and young at the beginning, but we do see a bit of development in her character. It's one of those stories where you do kind of shake your head and sigh a bit, but I found it really enjoyable, a really emotional read, and very interesting to read something that is written in verse, but is still a novel. That is another one that I would recommend. I read a lot of good books this month. Next is a graphic novel that I'm sure you all have heard about. It is Blue is the Warmest Colour. So I probably don't need to tell you how beautiful the artwork is in this, but it really is. I'm going to insert some pictures here because it's just stunning. I think it is ink and watercolour, and it's a really limited colour palette. It reminded me of Alison Bechdel a bit, in that you've just got that one highlight colour. In terms of the story, this is a doomed lesbian love story, but I found that it went in a direction that I wasn't really expecting it to. So you do have this sense of doom from the beginning, but it plays around with your expectations a bit as well, which is something that I really appreciated. Next was Saplings by Noel Streatfeild. Quick shout out to the Persephone N papers and bookmark. This was a buddy read with some other booktubers, some other lovely ladies, and I've had such a good time discussing this book with them. Noel Streatfeild wrote Ballet Shoes, which is a book that I never read. I had zero expectations when I went into this, and I didn't even know what it was about. I soon found out that this is about a middle-class family, and when it begins, it is just before the beginning of the Second World War. So at the start, it's very idyllic. It's at the beach and they're having a lovely time, and a lot of it is through the children's eyes. But the interesting thing is then it switches over to the adults' perspectives at times, which is something that I really enjoyed. I like it when authors do that. They sort of play around with your expectations, and to start with you could sort of see this as a children's novel almost, but then pretty quickly there are some things that make you go, ah, yeah, this is an adult novel. Basically about how this family deals with the war when it comes, the different reactions of all of the children and the parents. I enjoyed this. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars, but I particularly enjoyed talking about it with other people, and I will definitely be picking up more of the Persephone classics. So after reading The Fair Fight earlier in the month, I thought that it was about time that I actually finished a Sarah Waters novel. I started reading Tipping the Velvet years ago and didn't get all that far with it. So I picked up Fingersmith and was so glad that I did. This is such an amazing book. It's fast-paced, it's well written, it has lots of twists and turns, it's got some mystery in there, it's slightly gothic at times. It reminded me of Daphne du Maurier quite a bit. It's about two women, an heiress and a fingersmith being a thief. And the fingersmith gets involved in a plot to rob the heiress of her fortune. It's super exciting, lots of unexpected things happen, and it's just really good. You should read it. Finally, I finished Moab is My Washpot by Stephen Fry. Now, I'm pretty sure that I read at least some of this years ago. Quite a bit of it seemed familiar, but that might also be because I recently read Stephen Fry's novel, The Liar, and a lot of that is taken from his autobiography. This follows his life from childhood through to his admission to Cambridge. So it's mostly set at some school or another, and it's about the shenanigans that he gets up to. In true Fry style, it's quite analytical in places, it's quite self-deprecating in places, but it's also really, really funny. If you're a fan of Stephen Fry and think that he's interesting, and I don't know why you wouldn't, then this is a great book to read. So there we are, those are the books that I've got through in the past 2 weeks or so. I can't believe that all of those have been jammed into such a small space of time, and also that I've read so many great things. Hopefully this reading roll will continue. I have recently reached 3,000 subscribers, and I just wanted to say thank you so very much. I really appreciate it when people like and subscribe, and I particularly appreciate when people take the time to comment and discuss some of the books with me. So yes, this is an especially big thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye.